Congratulations, you've just woken up in ancient Rome around 73 BCE. The morning sun warms your face as you open your eyes, and for a moment, there's peace. That's the good news. The bad news? You're a slave in the world's most powerful empire, and your day is about to begin in ways you never imagined. Your name is Thracius, and you've only been in Rome for 3 months. Before that, you lived in Thrace, a region in what you might know today as parts of Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. You weren't born a slave. No, you were once free, with a family, a trade as a blacksmith, and a small plot of land that had been in your family for generations. But then Rome's legions came to your village during their eastern campaigns. The clash of iron, the screams of your neighbors, the smoke rising from burning homes, these memories still haunt your dreams. When the battle ended, the survivors, including you, were chained together and marched hundreds of miles to be sold in Rome's bustling slave markets. That's how most slaves in Rome began their journey, as prisoners of war from Rome's ever-expanding borders. As you rise from your straw pallet on the hard stone floor of your master's ergastulum, you know, a slave dormitory, you rub the iron collar around your neck. It's not particularly heavy, but its presence is a constant reminder of who, or rather what, you are now considered to be. Under Roman law, you're not a person, but a thing, a piece of property, what the Romans call instrumentum vocale, a tool that can speak. Your master, Marcus Lentulus Batiatus, runs a ludus, a gladiatorial training school in Capua, about 120 miles southeast of Rome. You're still new, so you haven't been selected for gladiator training yet. Instead, you work maintaining the facility, cleaning, cooking, repairing equipment, and attending to the needs of the gladiators. The good news is that you're skilled with metal from your days as a blacksmith. The bad news is that your master has noticed this skill and is considering either putting you to work forging weapons full-time, or perhaps worse, training you as a gladiator yourself. As you splash cold water on your face from a basin, other slaves begin to stir around you. There's Diona, a Greek woman captured when Romans sacked her coastal town. She works in the kitchen and sometimes slips you extra food when the overseer isn't looking. Then there's Gallus, an older Gaul who's been enslaved for over 20 years. He tends to the training yard and sometimes whispers stories of the world beyond Rome. And there's young Cyrus, barely 12, born to a slave mother in this very ludus. He knows no other life but service. Unlike many modern conceptions of slavery, Rome's system wasn't based on race or skin color. Slaves came from everywhere Rome conquered: Gaul, Hispania, Greece, Syria, Britannia, North Africa, and more. What mattered wasn't where you came from, but your status as property, and property you certainly are. The overseer's whip cracks in the air. Up, all of you. The sun doesn't wait, and neither does your work, he shouts. His name is Servius, and despite being a freedman himself, a former slave who earned his freedom, he's particularly harsh on the slaves under his supervision. Perhaps it's because he wants to distance himself from his past, or maybe it's because cruelty to those below him is the only power he's ever known. You quickly pull on your simple tunic, rough-spun wool that barely reaches your knees, and rush outside with the others. The good news is that you're allowed clothing. The bad news is that it marks you immediately as a slave. The short, poor-quality tunic is a visible symbol of your status that anyone in Rome would recognize instantly. The morning ritual begins with a roll call. Each slave must respond when their name is called, and woe to anyone who's late. Yesterday, a slave named Theseus was slow to appear, and Servius had him flogged 10 lashes. He's working today despite the wounds on his back. There's no rest for a slave who can still stand. Thracius, Servius calls, and you step forward, eyes downcast as expected. "Present, overseer," you respond, careful to use the proper title. Servius nods curtly and moves on to the next name. When the count is complete, he divides everyone into their work groups for the day. You're assigned to help the armorer, given your skills with metal. At least today you won't be cleaning the latrines or hauling water from the well. Small mercies in a life with few choices. As you walk to the smithy, you pass the training yard where gladiators are already beginning their morning exercises. These men are slaves too, but of a different sort. While most slaves, like you, lead lives of drudgery and anonymity, gladiators achieve a strange kind of fame. The good news is that successful gladiators can earn prize money, respect, and eventually even freedom. The bad news is that they must repeatedly risk death and brutal combat to achieve it. Among the practicing gladiators, one man stands out. His name is Spartacus, a Thracian like you. He arrived just a few weeks before you did, but already his skill with weapons has impressed the trainers. There are rumors that he was once a soldier, perhaps even fighting in an auxiliary unit of the Roman army before deserting or being captured. Whatever his past, he's now the rising star of Batiatus's ludus. Spartacus catches your eye as you pass, and for a moment, there's a flash of recognition, not that he knows you personally, but a recognition of shared homeland, of shared fate. He gives you an almost imperceptible nod before returning to his training. Something about his demeanor suggests a man who hasn't fully accepted his circumstances, despite the chains. At the smithy, you're put to work immediately. The armorer, an old Roman named Titus, isn't a slave but a paid craftsman who appreciates your knowledge of metalworking. "You've got good hands, Thracian," he says, as he shows you how to repair a damaged gladius, the short sword used by many fighters. Shame they're not free hands. Titus is kinder than most Romans you've encountered. The good news is that not all Romans are cruel to slaves. Some, like Titus, treat them almost as people. The bad news is that even the kindest Romans still view slavery as natural and necessary, a simple fact of life no more questionable than the rising sun. As you work the bellows and hammer heated metal, Titus explains the different types of gladiators you'll be making weapons for. The Murmillo fights with this gladius and carries a large rectangular shield. The Thraex, named after your people, you know, uses a curved short sword and a small round shield. The Retiarius fights with a net and trident, while the Secutor is armored specifically to counter him. You listen and learn, filing away this knowledge. Perhaps understanding the weapons might save your life someday, whether as a gladiator yourself or, well, you don't let yourself think too far ahead yet. By midday, your arms ache from the smithy work, but there's no real break. Slaves eat quickly, a simple meal of coarse bread, some olive oil, and perhaps a bit of bean porridge if you're lucky. The good news is that most Roman masters feed their slaves adequately. The bad news is that this isn't from kindness, but practicality. A starving slave can't work efficiently. As you eat, huddled with the other slaves in the shade of the kitchen wall, Gallus leans close to you. "Tonight," he whispers, so quietly you almost miss it. After dark, the tall cypress. Be there if you want to hear. Before you can ask what he means, he's moved away, leaving you puzzled. But the gleam in his eye suggests something important, perhaps even dangerous. The afternoon brings more work, repairing metal fittings on gladiator armor. From the training yard, you hear the crack of wooden practice swords and the trainers shouting instructions, occasionally punctuated by cries of pain. Training to be a gladiator isn't for the faint-hearted. It's brutal conditioning designed to prepare men for mortal combat. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the ludus grounds, You're finally allowed to finish your work. Your back aches, your hands are blistered despite your experience with metal, and fatigue weighs heavy on your limbs. But this is just one day of what might be a lifetime of servitude, unless something changes. Slaves in Rome could hope for freedom through several paths. Some masters freed loyal slaves in their wills. Others allowed slaves to save money and eventually purchase their freedom. Some slaves earned freedom through exceptional service, but these were the lucky few. Most lived and died as property, their lives entirely at the whim of their owners. After a meager evening meal, slaves are allowed a few hours of rest before sleep. This is when they can talk quietly among themselves, mend clothing, or simply sit in exhausted silence. Some pray to their homeland gods, though slaves are expected to worship the Roman gods of their masters. Some slaves were even used in religious ceremonies, their status making them appropriate servants for certain deities. You remember Gallus's mysterious invitation and make your way cautiously toward the tall cypress tree at the edge of the property. It's risky to be out after dark, but your curiosity overcomes your caution. Near the cypress, you find a small group of slaves gathered in the shadows, speaking in hushed tones. Gallus nods when he sees you approach and makes space in the circle. "Our new Thracian has joined us," he says quietly. "Good. We were just discussing news from the outside." "What news?" you ask, voice barely above a whisper. "There's been another slave revolt in Sicily," says a man named Alexandros, a Greek scribe who works in Batiatus's office and therefore has access to messages and correspondence. "The second one in 30 years. Thousands of slaves took control of large parts of the island before the Romans finally crushed them. The news sends a murmur through the small group. Slave revolts are rare but terrifying to the Romans. Their entire economy and way of life depends on the compliance of a massive enslaved population that outnumbers them in many regions." "It won't be the last," says another voice, and you're surprised to see Spartacus himself standing at the edge of the gathering. His presence commands immediate attention and respect. The Romans believe themselves invincible, but every empire has its weaknesses. "Dangerous talk," warns Gallus, though there's no rebuke in his tone. Spartacus shrugs. "What can they do to us that they haven't already done? Take our freedom, our homeland, our families?" His eyes scan the gathered faces. "We have nothing left to lose but our lives, and those are hardly worth living as they are." You feel a chill at his words, not because you disagree, but because of the burning conviction behind them. This is not idle complaint. There's something deeper brewing here. "We're not here to plan rebellion," Gallus says quickly, perhaps for the benefit of any who might be informants. "Just to share news and company. Remember that." The gathering disperses soon after, each slave returning to their sleeping area before they're missed. But as you lie on your straw pallet that night, Spartacus's words echo in your mind. What can they do to us that they haven't already done? Sleep comes fitfully, filled with dreams of home, and freedom mingled with nightmares of chains and arena sand stained with blood. This is the reality of a slave in Rome. Even your dreams aren't your own. Days pass in much the same routine. Wake before dawn, work until dusk, eat enough to survive, sleep, repeat. The rhythm of slave life is designed to break the spirit through relentless monotony, punctuated by fear of punishment. The good news is that humans are remarkably adaptable. The bad news is that adapting to slavery means losing pieces of yourself day by day. You continue to attend the secret gatherings by the cypress tree when you can. Sometimes there's news from the outside world, reports of pirate raids along the coast, whispers of tribal rebellions in Gaul, rumors of political machinations in Rome itself. Other times, the slaves simply share stories of their homelands, keeping their cultures alive in whispered tales after dark. Spartacus isn't always present, but when he is, the energy of the gathering changes. Other slaves look to him instinctively, drawn to his quiet strength and unwavering dignity despite his chains. You begin to understand why, in a world designed to strip people of their humanity, Spartacus has somehow held on to his. One evening, about 2 months after your arrival at the Ludus, Spartacus approaches you directly as you work in the smithy. "Your work is good," he says, nodding toward the sword you're repairing. "In Thrace, were you a smith?" "Yes," you answer, surprised by the direct question. "My father taught me, and his father before him." Spartacus nods thoughtfully, a useful skill, one that makes things that can both build and destroy. He runs a finger along the edge of the blade. The Romans have forgotten that everything they use to control us can also be used against them. Before you can respond, he's gone, leaving you with a strange mixture of hope and dread. Something is coming. You can feel it in the air, like the stillness before a storm. That night, you're awakened by a hand shaking your shoulder gently but urgently. It's Spartacus, with several other gladiators behind him. "Now," he whispers, "if you want freedom, come now." Your heart pounds as you realize what's happening. This is no drill, no secret meeting. This is the beginning of something that could mean either freedom or death, possibly both. Without hesitation, you rise and follow. Throughout the slaves' quarters, others are being roused. Not all, but those who have been deemed trustworthy. In all, perhaps 70 or 80 slaves gather in the training yard, armed with kitchen knives, tools, and a few proper weapons that somehow found their way out of the armory. Spartacus addresses the group, his voice low but clear. "Tonight we take back what's ours, our freedom. We'll overpower the guards, take their weapons, and escape. Once free of this place, we make for Mount Vesuvius, where we can defend ourselves and gather strength. The Romans will hunt us," someone points out. "Let them," Spartacus replies with a grim smile. "I'd rather die a free man on a mountainside than live another day as someone's property." A murmur of agreement passes through the group. This is madness, but it's also perhaps the only chance many of these people will ever have at freedom. "Anyone who doesn't wish to join us can return to their beds now," Spartacus continues. "We won't force anyone to fight, and we won't harm those who stay." No one moves. Whatever fears they harbor about the revolt's chances, the possibility of freedom outweighs them all. "Then let's begin," Spartacus says, raising a stolen gladius. "For freedom." The revolt erupts with surprising speed and efficiency. The night guards, few in number and complacent in their routine, are quickly overwhelmed. Keys are taken, more weapons secured, and suddenly the balance of power shifts. You find yourself fighting alongside men and women who hours ago were beaten down in spirit and body, but now move with the desperate energy of those with everything to gain. The clash of metal, the shouts of alarm, the rush of adrenaline, it's terrifying and exhilarating all at once. By dawn, the ludus of Batiatus is in the hands of the slaves. Some masters and guards lie dead. Others are locked in the very cells they once used to punish disobedient slaves. The gladiators, trained fighters all, form the core of what is rapidly becoming not just an escape, but a rebellion. Standing in the courtyard as the rising sun illuminates your first moments of freedom, you look around at the faces of your fellow rebels. There's fear there, certainly. What you've done guarantees a terrible punishment if captured, but there's something else too. Dignity restored, humanity reclaimed. Spartacus addresses the gathered rebels once more. "This is just the beginning. Rome will send soldiers against us. We must be ready. We go to Vesuvius, where the terrain will help us defend ourselves. Along the way, we free every slave we encounter, who wishes to join us. We take food, weapons, and supplies from the villas of the rich. This is no longer just an escape. This is war. A cheer rises from the crowd, though you note that some look uncertain at this escalation. Escaping to freedom is one thing. Waging war against Rome itself is quite another. As the rebels prepare to leave the ludus, gathering supplies and organizing into groups, you find yourself at a crossroads. The path ahead promises hardship and danger with only slim hope of actual freedom. The Romans do not forgive slave revolts. They crush them with brutal efficiency and make examples of the participants. Yet the alternative, to somehow avoid joining the rebellion and remain a slave, is unthinkable now that you've tasted these few moments of freedom. The collar around your neck seems to tighten at the very thought of continuing in bondage. You make your choice quickly, gathering what useful tools and weapons you can. Whatever lies ahead, you will face it as a person, not as property. As the rebels move out of the ludus, you fall in alongside them, leaving behind the life of a slave and stepping into the uncertain future of a rebel against Rome. The good news is that you're free, at least for now. The bad news? You've just made an enemy of the most powerful empire the world has ever known. And as you march toward Mount Vesuvius with this growing army of the formerly enslaved, you can't help but wonder how many of you will live to enjoy the freedom you've just seized. And what does freedom even mean in a world where Rome's long shadow touches every corner? These questions will have to wait. For now, there's ground to cover, more slaves to free, and defenses to prepare. The third servile war has begun, and you're no longer just Thracius the slave. You're Thracius the rebel, writing your own story in defiance of those who would own your very existence. The night falls over your first day of freedom as you make camp in the hills. Tomorrow brings uncertainty, but for this moment, under the same stars that shine over your distant homeland, you are your own master. And despite the dangers ahead, that knowledge allows you to sleep more peacefully than you have in months. Dawn breaks over your makeshift camp, golden light filtering through the trees as you and your fellow rebels prepare for the journey ahead. Mount Vesuvius looms in the distance, your destination and potential sanctuary. The mountain is still decades away from the famous eruption that will one day destroy Pompeii, but its steep slopes and rugged terrain make it a natural fortress against Roman forces. Spartacus moves through the camp, speaking with small groups, organizing and encouraging. He has a natural talent for leadership that transcends his former status as a slave. The gladiators form the core of your fighting force, but most of the escaped slaves, including you, have little or no combat training. The good news is that many have useful skills from their enslavement: blacksmithing, carpentry, cooking, farming, and medicine. The bad news is that skills alone won't stop Roman spears. We need to train everyone who can fight, Spartacus announces as the camp prepares to move out, and we need more weapons. The Romans won't give us time to prepare at our leisure. He's right about that. Already, word of your escape must be spreading. Batiatus, if he survived the uprising, will have sent messengers to local authorities. The Romans take slave revolts very seriously. Their entire economic and social system depends on keeping the enslaved population under control. As you break camp and begin the day's march, you find yourself walking alongside Diona, the Greek kitchen slave who sometimes slipped you extra food. "I never thought I'd be doing this," she says, adjusting the small pack of supplies on her back. 5 years I've been a slave, always keeping my head down, just trying to survive each day. Now look at us. Do you regret coming? You ask, curious about how others view this dangerous gamble for freedom. She shakes her head firmly. No, even if it ends badly, at least I'll die having made a choice. That's something they could never give us as slaves. real choices. Her words resonate with you. In Roman slavery, choice is perhaps the first thing that's stripped away. Slaves have no legal right to decide anything about their lives, not where they live, who they marry, what work they do, or even whether they have children. Female slaves are particularly vulnerable, with no legal protection against sexual assault by their masters. The column of rebels moves steadily through the countryside, avoiding main roads and skirting populated areas where possible. Scouts, mostly former gladiators with keen eyes and quick feet, range ahead and to the sides, watching for danger or opportunity. By midday, your group encounters its first test. The scouts return with news of a small Roman patrol ahead, perhaps a dozen soldiers escorting a wagon train of supplies toward Capua. Spartacus calls the gladiators together quickly, formulating a plan. You're included in this council not because you're a fighter, but because your blacksmithing knowledge might be useful in assessing the weapons you could potentially capture. They don't know about us yet, Spartacus explains. They're just a regular patrol. If we move quickly and decisively, we can overwhelm them before they can organize a defense. The plan is simple but effective. A small group of rebels will appear to be travelers in distress, drawing the patrol's attention. When the Romans approach, the main force will emerge from hiding and attack from multiple directions. As the patrol comes into view, you watch from the cover of trees, heart pounding. The Roman soldiers look formidable in their organized formation, with their uniform equipment and disciplined bearing. These are exactly the force that conquered your homeland and so many others. But today, they're outnumbered. The ambush works perfectly. The Romans, surprised and surrounded, put up fierce resistance but are quickly overwhelmed. Within minutes, the skirmish is over. 3 rebels lie dead, but all of the Roman soldiers have been killed or captured. The supply wagons, containing food, weapons, and other valuable goods, are now in rebel hands. This small victory energizes the group, but Spartacus remains cautious. This was just a patrol, he reminds everyone. Soon they'll send legions against us, real legions, with thousands of trained soldiers. We need to reach Vesuvius and prepare. The captured equipment is quickly distributed. You examine the Roman swords, shields, and armor with professional interest. The craftsmanship is excellent. Roman military equipment is standardized and well made, designed for efficient killing. Now these tools of oppression will serve the cause of freedom. The surviving Roman soldiers present a dilemma. Some rebels want to execute them as vengeance for their years of suffering under Roman rule. Others argue for releasing them with a message that the rebels fight only for freedom, not for blood. Spartacus listens to both sides before making his decision. We're not Romans, he says finally. We don't enslave our enemies or kill prisoners for sport. Release them, but take their armor and weapons. Let them return to their commanders with news that the slaves they thought broken have teeth. This merciful approach surprises you. In the arena, Spartacus was trained to kill without hesitation. As a slave, he suffered under Roman cruelty, yet he chooses not to replicate their brutality. It's a reminder that freedom isn't just about breaking chains. It's about choosing what kind of people you want to be once those chains are gone. The journey continues with renewed urgency. The encounter with the patrol means that soon, proper Roman forces will be mobilized against you. Every hour of travel, every new slave freed, every weapon acquired, strengthens your position for the conflict to come. As you travel, you begin to understand the true scope of Roman slavery. Nearly every villa and farm you pass uses slave labor. In some agricultural areas, slaves outnumber the free population significantly. The good news for your rebellion is that this provides a vast potential recruitment pool. The bad news is that many slaves are too afraid, too broken, or too conditioned to join your cause. When you approach rural estates, Spartacus sends small groups to liberate the slaves and gather supplies. Some masters flee at the first sign of armed rebels. Others attempt to resist and pay the price for their defiance. With each estate, your numbers grow, though not all choose to join you. Some slaves, particularly those born into slavery who know no other life, are terrified by the concept of freedom and its uncertainties. "I don't understand," you say to Gallus, as you watch an older slave refuse to leave his master's villa despite having the opportunity. "How can anyone choose to remain enslaved?" Gallus sighs, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. Fear is a powerful chain, perhaps stronger than iron. Some have been slaves so long they cannot imagine any other existence. The familiar suffering seems safer than unknown freedom. This psychological dimension of slavery is something you're just beginning to understand. The Romans don't maintain their slave system through physical force alone, though they certainly use plenty of that. They also employ a careful conditioning that makes slaves internalize their status, believe in their own inferiority, and fear the very freedom that should be their natural right. By nightfall, your rebel band has grown to nearly 300 strong and has acquired a decent cache of weapons, food, and supplies. Camp is made in a defensible position, with sentries posted and watches organized. Despite the day's success, there's a nervous energy in the air. Everyone knows that real Roman military response is coming. Around the campfires that night, you listen to the stories of your fellow rebels. Each has their own tale of how they came to be a slave in Rome's vast empire. An older man named Quintus was once a merchant who fell into debt and sold himself into slavery to protect his family. A young woman called Lucia was born to slave parents on a large agricultural estate, never knowing freedom until today. A boy no more than 15, Marcus, was abandoned as an infant and raised as a household slave. The diversity of backgrounds reminds you that Roman slavery was a complex system with many paths to bondage. Unlike later historical slavery systems that targeted specific ethnic groups, Rome enslaved people from all conquered territories and social classes. What united slaves in Rome wasn't their origin, but their legal status as human property. This status had profound implications for daily life. Roman slaves could be bought and sold at their master's whim, separating families without recourse. They could be punished physically without legal protection. A master who killed their own slave faced little or no consequence. They could be used sexually without consent. They could be forced to fight to the death for entertainment. They had no right to marry legally, though some masters permitted informal unions. Any children born to slave women automatically became slaves themselves, regardless of who the father was. As you share these reflections with those around your campfire, the conversation turns to what freedom might look like if your rebellion succeeds. "I want land," says a former agricultural slave named Titus. "Just a small plot, enough to feed my family without answering to any master." "I want to go home," says a woman from Gaul. "I was taken from my village 10 years ago. I don't even know if my children still live." "I want revenge," says another, his face scarred from repeated beatings. "For every lash I took, I want Roman blood." Spartacus, passing by your fire, pauses to listen. "All worthy desires," he says. "But first, we must survive. Freedom means nothing if we're dead or recaptured." He sits with your group, accepting a cup of watered wine. Despite his leadership position, he makes no effort to separate himself from the common rebels. This, you realize, is another difference between your rebellion and Roman society. Here, worth is determined by contribution and character, not by arbitrary status. "What do you want, Spartacus?" someone asks. "If we win this fight against Rome, what then?" Spartacus considers the question, turning the cup in his hands. I want to break the system that makes some men masters and others slaves, he says finally. I want a world where no one wears chains, where no human is another's property. He looks around at the expectant faces, but that's a distant dream. For now, I want us to reach Vesuvius, build our strength, and show Rome that we are not animals to be bought and sold, but people willing to die for our freedom. His words bring murmurs of agreement. It's a modest ambition for now, survival and dignity, but one that resonates deeply with everyone present. As the night grows deeper, you find yourself on sentry duty alongside a former house slave named Cassius. Unlike many of the others, he can read and write, skills he was taught to help manage his master's household accounts. What was it like, you ask him, being a house slave rather than working in the fields or mines? Cassius gives a bitter laugh. Easier on the body, harder on the soul. I ate better than field slaves, slept in the house instead of a barracks, but I was never out of my master's sight, never had a moment that was truly my own. He gestures to a small scar on his cheek. And when I made mistakes, the punishment was still swift. Different masters, different conditions, but always the same truth. We were possessions, not people. This was the reality for Rome's estimated 2 to 3 million slaves. Whether they served in urban households, rural estates, mines, or public works, their fundamental status remained the same. Some were treated relatively well, others subjected to unimaginable cruelty, but all lived with the knowledge that their very existence depended on the whims of their owners. The next morning brings new challenges. Scouts return with reports of Roman response. A militia of about 3,000 men has been hastily assembled under the command of a praetor named Gaius Claudius Glaber. They're moving in your direction, clearly intent on crushing the rebellion before it can grow further. 3,000 against our few hundred, Gallus says, shaking his head. Even with our gladiators, those aren't good odds. Spartacus seems unconcerned. We won't face them on open ground, he says. That's what they expect, and that's how they always win. Disciplined formations against disorganized enemies. We'll use different tactics. The march toward Vesuvius takes on new urgency. By midday, your band reaches the lower slopes of the mountain and begins to ascend toward more defensible positions. The terrain grows steeper, the paths narrower, good ground for defenders, difficult for attackers, especially those in formation. As you climb, Spartacus explains his strategy to the group leaders. The Romans will follow us up the main path. They're arrogant and think us simple escapees with no military knowledge. They won't expect strategy from slaves. He points to a narrow passage between two rocky outcroppings. We'll make our camp visible from below, let them see our fires at night. They'll come up this path thinking to surprise us. Instead, we'll surprise them from above and behind. It's a sound plan that takes advantage of your smaller numbers and the terrain. The good news is that many of the rebels, including you, know these mountains from gathering wood and hunting for your master's tables. The bad news is that if the plan fails, there's nowhere to retreat. The next day is spent preparing. Fighting positions are established. Crude but effective weapons are fashioned for those without proper arms, and everyone of fighting age receives basic instruction from the gladiators. You work with other craftspeople to repair and improve weapons, turning farming tools into instruments of war when necessary. By nightfall, everything is ready. As planned, campfires are lit in visible locations, creating the impression of a careless rebel camp. In truth, most of your force is hidden in positions along the path and above it, waiting in tense silence. Sleep is impossible as you wait with the others, a repurposed farm tool gripped tightly in your hands. You've never killed anyone before. The gladiators have. It was their enforced profession. But for most of the rebels, including you, this will be a first taste of combat, not as sport, but as survival. Dawn is just breaking when the sentries give the signal. Roman forces are moving up the path. Glaber has taken the bait, bringing his militia up the narrow trail in a long column, unable to form their usual battle formations in the constricted space. You watch from your hiding place as the Romans advance, their red cloaks and gleaming armor marking them clearly against the rocky ground. They move with confidence, clearly expecting to find a disorganized camp of slaves they can easily overwhelm. When the signal comes, a bird call that could easily be mistaken for natural wildlife, the trap is sprung. Rebels emerge from hiding positions all along the path, attacking from above with rocks and javelins, from the sides with makeshift spears and captured Roman swords. The Romans, caught in the narrow defile, cannot maneuver effectively. Their superior numbers become a liability as they crowd together, unable to bring their weapons to bear. Panic spreads through their ranks as rebels attack from directions they never expected. You find yourself in the midst of chaos, striking out at armored men who, hours ago, would have commanded your absolute obedience. There's a strange power in the reversal, the hunted becoming hunters, the owned becoming owners of their fate. The battle is surprisingly brief. The Roman militia, despite their advantages in equipment and training, are thoroughly routed. Many are killed, others throw down their weapons and flee back down the mountain. Glaber himself barely escapes with his life, his authority and reputation in tatters. When the fighting ends, the rebels find themselves in possession of the battlefield and, more importantly, the Romans' abandoned equipment. Hundreds of proper weapons, armor sets, and supplies now belong to the rebellion. It's a victory beyond what anyone dared hope for. Spartacus calls the rebels together amid the aftermath. Today, we've shown that slaves can fight and win against Roman arms, he announces, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. But this was just one battle. Rome will send more soldiers, better soldiers next time. We must use this victory to grow stronger. He outlines his plan: establish a defensible camp on Vesuvius, send groups to free more slaves from surrounding areas, train everyone in combat, and prepare for the inevitable Roman response. It's clear that what started as an escape has evolved into something much larger, a full-scale rebellion against Rome itself. As the day progresses and the camp takes shape, you find yourself working alongside others to fashion more weapons from captured Roman equipment. Your blacksmith skills are increasingly valuable, and you take pride in creating tools that might help secure freedom for yourself and others. You know they'll never let us go, says an older rebel working beside you, hammering a captured sword back into shape after it was damaged in the fight. Even if we wanted to just escape the Italian peninsula, they'd hunt us to the ends of the earth. Why, you ask, though you suspect you know the answer. Because we're more than just escaped property to them now, he replies. We're a symbol. If slaves can successfully rebel in the heart of Roman territory, what's to stop millions of others from doing the same? Our existence threatens the foundation of their society. He's right. Roman civilization is built on slave labor. Slaves work the vast agricultural estates that feed the empire. Slaves mine the metals that create Rome's wealth. Slaves build the roads, aqueducts, and buildings that demonstrate Roman engineering prowess. Slaves teach, heal, entertain, and serve in Roman households. Without slavery, the Roman economic and social system would collapse. That night, as fires burn throughout the rebel camp, there's celebration of the victory, but also preparation for what's to come. Weapons training continues, even by firelight. Scouts return with reports of more slaves joining your cause, swelling your numbers daily. Supply caches are established in hidden locations throughout the mountain. You sit with Diona and Gallus, sharing a meal of bread and dried meat taken from Roman supplies. Despite the day's success, a question weighs on your mind. What happens if we actually succeed, you ask? If we keep defeating Roman forces, then what? We can't defeat the entire empire. Gallus, who has seen more of life than most, shrugs. Perhaps not, but sometimes the victory is in the fighting itself. For every day we remain free, for every slave who joins us, for every Roman who fears us, that's already a kind of winning. Diona nods in agreement. Before today, Romans thought of slaves as docile, as broken. Now they'll look at every slave and wonder, is this one plotting rebellion too? That fear is a power we never had before. Their perspective helps you understand the larger significance of what you're part of. This rebellion isn't just about the freedom of a few hundred or even a few thousand individuals. It's a challenge to the entire concept of human bondage that underlies Roman society. In the days that follow, your rebel camp evolves into a surprisingly well-organized community. Different skills from your enslaved past become valuable in new ways. Former household slaves who can read and write help record inventories and organize supplies. Agricultural slaves apply their knowledge to finding and growing food. Those with medical training tend to the wounded. Meanwhile, the gladiators train everyone capable of fighting. Basic formations are taught, weapon skills developed, and the formerly enslaved begin to transform into a fighting force. It's not a Roman legion by any means. You lack the equipment, discipline, and decades of tradition, but it's becoming something formidable in its own right. Word continues to spread, and more slaves escape to join you. Some bring valuable intelligence about Roman movements or useful skills. Others simply bring their desire for freedom and willingness to fight for it. Within weeks, your numbers have grown from the original 70 or so gladiators to several thousand rebels. This growth brings challenges as well as strength. Feeding so many people in a mountain camp isn't easy. Different languages, cultures, and backgrounds sometimes create tensions. Leadership structures must evolve beyond Spartacus and his original gladiator companions to include representatives from various groups. Through it all, Spartacus maintains the respect and loyalty of the growing rebel army. He leads by example, trains alongside the newest recruits, and makes decisions transparently rather than through command. It's a different model of leadership than the rigid hierarchy of Rome, and it seems to work for this community of the formerly enslaved. About a month after your escape from the Ludus, scouts bring alarming news. Rome has dispatched a new force against you, not a hastily assembled militia this time, but 2 proper legions under the command of the consuls, Lucius Gellius Publicola and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Clodianus. This represents a significant escalation in Rome's response to your rebellion. Spartacus calls a council to discuss this development. You're included now, having proven your value not just as a blacksmith, but as someone with good judgment. The discussion is heated, with different factions advocating different approaches. We should split into smaller groups, argues one former house slave. Make ourselves harder to find and fight. No, we should attack them before they're ready, counters a gladiator. We use the same surprise tactics that worked against Glaber. We should try to negotiate, suggests another. Ask for free passage out of Roman territories in exchange for ending our raids. Spartacus listens to all viewpoints before sharing his own. Rome doesn't negotiate with slaves, he says simply, and splitting up makes us weaker, not stronger. As for attacking them directly, 2 full legions are a different enemy than Glaber's militia. He paces the center of the circle, considering options. We need to draw them into terrain where their numbers and formations won't help them. And we need to keep freeing slaves. Every pair of hands makes us stronger. Every empty villa makes Rome weaker. The strategy that emerges is bold. Continue to build your forces while conducting strategic raids on Roman targets, always avoiding direct confrontation with the legions on their terms. When forced to fight, choose the ground carefully to negate Roman advantages. This approach proves successful in the weeks that follow. Small groups of rebels attack isolated estates and outposts, freeing slaves and gathering supplies before disappearing back into the countryside. When Roman forces give chase, they find themselves led into ambushes or exhausted in fruitless pursuits. Your reputation grows with each success. What began as a local disturbance is now recognized as a serious threat. More slaves risk everything to join you, drawn by stories of the growing rebel army that dares to challenge Rome itself. For you personally, these months bring transformation. The skills you developed as a blacksmith serve you well, but you've also learned to fight, to lead small groups on raids, to make decisions that affect others' lives. The man who woke up as property less than 3 months ago now helps shape the future of thousands. One evening, as you finish repairing weapons damaged in a recent skirmish, Spartacus approaches your work area. He examines a sword you've just finished, testing its balance with an expert's hand. Good work, he says with approval. Sharp edge, strong blade. A weapon worthy of freedom. Thank you, you reply, wondering why the rebellion's leader has sought you out personally. Spartacus sits on a nearby stump, still turning the sword in his hands. Tomorrow we face our biggest test yet. Our scouts report that both consular armies are converging near Placentia. They think they've trapped us between them. You nod, having heard rumors of this development. What will we do? What they don't expect, Spartacus says with a grim smile. We're going to attack one army before the other can join it. Hit them with everything we have, then disappear before the second force arrives. It's an audacious plan, betting everything on the element of surprise and the growing skill of your rebel fighters. If it works, you'll have defeated a consular army, something unthinkable for a force of former slaves. If it fails, the rebellion might end then and there. I want you with the main attack force, Spartacus continues. Your skills are needed both for fighting and for what comes after, when weapons need repair. The trust implicit in this assignment fills you with both pride and trepidation. You're no longer just supporting the rebellion, you're at its heart. That night, few in the camp sleep soundly. Tomorrow's battle could change everything, for better or worse. As you lie awake, staring at the stars through the trees, you reflect on the journey that brought you here, from free Thracian to Roman slave to rebel fighter. Your life has transformed completely in less than a year. Whatever happens tomorrow, you know you can never return to chains. Death would be preferable to slavery now that you've tasted freedom again. Dawn comes too quickly, gray light filtering through morning mist as the rebel army assembles. There's nervous energy in the air, but also determination. These people are fighting not just for their lives, but for their humanity, for the right to exist as more than property. Spartacus moves among the gathered fighters, offering encouragement and last-minute advice. When he reaches you, he clasps your shoulder firmly. Remember, he says, they fight because they're ordered to. We fight because we choose to. That makes us stronger. With these words echoing in your mind, you march with the rebel army toward what could be either your greatest victory or your final stand against the might of Rome. The good news is that you face this moment as a free person, making your own choices. The bad news? Those choices might lead to your death before the sun sets today, but as you march in formation with your fellow rebels, weapons ready and spirits determined, you realize that even this bad news contains a kind of victory. A slave dies at another's whim, but you will live or die by your own choice, fighting for freedom rather than serving in chains. And in that knowledge, there is a power that even mighty Rome cannot take away. Morning mist clings to the valleys as your rebel army approaches the Roman force. Through gaps in the trees, you catch glimpses of red cloaks and gleaming armor, one of the two consular armies, camped in what they believe is a secure position. The good news is that they don't expect an attack from mere slaves. The bad news is that these are professional soldiers, not the hastily assembled militia you faced before. Spartacus has divided your forces into 3 groups. The largest will attack the Roman front directly, while 2 smaller forces circle to hit the flanks simultaneously. You're with the main group, your repaired sword gripped tightly, your heart pounding. The signal comes, a horn blast that cuts through the morning quiet, and suddenly the carefully planned attack erupts into chaos. Thousands of rebels charge from the forest edge, screaming battle cries in dozens of languages. The Romans, caught during their morning meal preparations, scramble to form defensive lines. What follows is a blur of violence and noise, unlike anything you've experienced. The disciplined formations that make Roman legions so effective on open battlefields work against them in this surprise attack. Your forces crash into their partially formed lines, creating gaps that are quickly exploited. You find yourself fighting alongside former gladiators, their trained precision a stark contrast to your own desperate swings. A Roman soldier lunges at you, his gladius aiming for your chest. You parry instinctively, the skills learned in training sessions paying off. Your counterstrike catches him under the arm, finding the gap in his armor. The look of shock on his face as he falls, that a slave could kill a Roman soldier, will stay with you forever. Around you, the battle rages. The Romans recover from their initial surprise and begin to organize more effective resistance. For a moment, it seems the tide might turn against you. Then the flanking forces hit from both sides simultaneously, sending the Roman lines into disarray once more. Consul Gellius attempts to rally his troops, but the momentum has shifted decisively. What began as a Roman breakfast ends as a Roman rout. Soldiers throw down their weapons and flee. Others surrender, dropping to their knees before fighters they would have whipped without hesitation only months before. By midday, the battlefield belongs to the rebels. The cost has been high. Hundreds of your fellow fighters lie dead or wounded. But the Roman losses are far greater. An entire consular army has been defeated by an army of slaves. As you help gather weapons from the fallen, the magnitude of what you've accomplished begins to sink in. This wasn't just a skirmish or an ambush. This was a proper battle against Rome's main military force, and you won. The captured Roman soldiers present the same dilemma as before. Some rebels, fresh from the violence of battle, call for their execution. Others argue for mercy. Spartacus, blood-spattered from fighting at the front lines, makes the final decision. Disarm them, take their armor and supplies, but harm no prisoners, he commands. We fight for freedom, not vengeance. Let them return to Rome and tell their masters that slaves defeated a consular army in open battle. It's a powerful message, though you note that some rebels grumble at this mercy. Those who suffered the greatest cruelties as slaves often harbor the deepest desire for retribution. With the battle won, there's no time to celebrate. The second consular army under Lentulus will arrive soon, drawn by news of the fighting. Spartacus orders an immediate withdrawal, taking all captured weapons, armor, and supplies. The wounded are carried on improvised stretchers. No one is left behind. Your forces melt back into the countryside before Lentulus' army arrives, leaving them to find only their defeated comrades and a battlefield stripped of anything useful. It's another psychological blow to Roman pride and another boost to rebel morale. The weeks that follow bring a string of similar victories. Your rebel army, now numbering nearly 30,000, moves through the Italian countryside almost at will. More slaves join your ranks daily, and your reputation grows. Romans begin to fear traveling outside cities. Estates are abandoned as owners flee to urban centers for protection. For perhaps the first time in Roman history, slaves hold the upper hand. During this period, your own role continues to evolve. Your skill with metal makes you invaluable for maintaining weapons, but you've also proven yourself in combat and leadership. Spartacus has given you command of a group of about 50 fighters, mostly fellow Thracians and Greeks with similar backgrounds to your own. One evening, as your band makes camp after a successful raid on a Roman supply convoy, you find yourself sitting with Spartacus and other group leaders around a council fire. The discussion centers on an important question: what is the ultimate goal of your rebellion? We can't defeat all of Rome, says a Gallic leader named Brennus. They have too many legions, too many resources. We should use our strength now to break out of Italy, cross the Alps, and return to our homelands. This suggestion receives support from many, especially those from Gaul and Germanic regions to the north. The idea of returning home, of seeing families and lands that many thought lost forever, holds powerful appeal. No, counters a Syrian named Castus. We should move south instead, to Sicily. There have been successful slave revolts there before. The island is fertile, defensible, and we could build a new society there, free from Roman rule. This too finds supporters, particularly among those who have no homes to return to or who come from eastern regions too distant to practically reach. Spartacus listens to all viewpoints before offering his own. Both paths have merit, he acknowledges. But first, we must secure our position here in Italy. Rome has been humiliated, but not defeated. They will send more legions against us. Their pride and their economic system demand it. He unrolls a crude map of the Italian peninsula, pointing to various locations. Winter approaches. We need secure positions, food stores, and continued training. In the spring, we can decide whether to move north or south. The practicality of this approach wins general agreement. Your rebellion has succeeded beyond anyone's wildest hopes, but it remains fragile. One major defeat could undo everything you've accomplished. As the council disperses, you find yourself walking back to your group's campfire alongside Spartacus. The burden of leadership shows in the new lines on his face, and the watchful caution that never quite leaves his eyes. You fought well in the battle against Gellius, he says, breaking the comfortable silence between you. Your group follows you willingly. I try to lead as you do, you reply, by example rather than fear. He nods approvingly. That's the difference between us and Rome. They build with the whip and the cross. We must build with something stronger, respect, common purpose, the dignity that comes from choosing one's own path. His words articulate something you felt but couldn't express. This rebellion isn't just fighting against slavery, it's trying to create something new in its place. A community where former slaves govern themselves, where work is shared rather than coerced, where decisions come from consensus rather than command. Do you think it can last, you ask, this world we're making? Spartacus looks into the distance, his expression unreadable in the fading light. I don't know, he admits. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither will its replacement be. But even if we ultimately fail, we've already succeeded in one important way. We've shown that slaves can claim their humanity, can fight for freedom, can build something worthy together. The conversation stays with you that night as you check on your group. These men and women who follow you have transformed from broken, fearful slaves into confident fighters who look you in the eye as equals. Whatever comes next, this change cannot be undone. Winter arrives, bringing new challenges. The rebel army establishes semi-permanent camps in defensible positions throughout southern Italy. Food becomes a primary concern. Raiding can only provide so much, and many of the estates you previously targeted have been abandoned. Fortunately, many of your rebels were agricultural slaves who know how to preserve food, hunt game, and identify edible plants. Their knowledge, once used to feed their masters, now sustains your rebellion through the lean months. During this relative lull in fighting, training intensifies. Former gladiators teach fighting techniques to newer rebels. Captured Roman equipment is studied and replicated when possible. Tactics are practiced and refined. What began as a desperate breakout has evolved into a disciplined fighting force with its own unique style, combining Roman techniques with methods from the homelands of various rebel groups. You spend much of your time establishing forges in different rebel camps, teaching basic metalworking to others so that weapons can be maintained and produced. It's fulfilling to pass on your knowledge, to see skills that were once demanded of you as a slave now freely given for a cause you believe in. One brisk winter morning, as you demonstrate how to properly temper a sword blade to a group of apprentices, a commotion at the camp's edge draws your attention. Scouts are returning at a gallop, and their urgent manner suggests important news. You leave your students to their practice and make your way to the command tent where Spartacus and other leaders will hear the scouts' report. As one of the group commanders, you have the right to attend these councils now. The news is sobering. Rome has appointed Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of its wealthiest and most ambitious citizens, to end the slave rebellion once and for all. He's been granted extraordinary powers and resources, 8 full legions, about 40,000 trained soldiers, along with auxiliary forces. Crassus is different from the commanders we've faced before, explains one of the scouts, a former household slave who can read and has sources in Roman towns. He's ruthless and calculating, and he's staking his political future on defeating us. Spartacus absorbs this information with characteristic calm. We expected Rome to escalate. Now we know the form that escalation takes. Can we defeat 8 legions? Asks a Gallic commander, giving voice to the question on everyone's mind. Not in a single battle, Spartacus acknowledges, but neither can Crassus easily defeat us if we refuse to fight on his terms. We have mobility, knowledge of the terrain, and the support of local slave populations. He has numbers and equipment, but moves slowly with his legions. The strategy that emerges from this council is one of flexibility. Your forces will divide into smaller, more mobile groups when needed, rejoining for specific operations. You'll target Crassus's supply lines rather than his main force, wearing down Roman morale through constant harassment rather than decisive battle. As spring approaches, this strategy is put to the test. Crassus moves his legions methodically through southern Italy, attempting to trap rebel forces between his columns. You respond with hit-and-run tactics, ambushing isolated units, destroying bridges after your forces cross them, and generally frustrating Roman efforts to bring your main force to battle. This approach works well at first. Crassus loses men and supplies without making significant progress against your rebellion, but he adapts quickly, tightening his formations and improving his intelligence gathering. The space for your maneuvers gradually shrinks. The situation comes to a head when Crassus implements a new strategy, building fortifications across the Bruttium Peninsula, effectively cutting off your southern escape routes. With the sea on three sides and Roman walls blocking the north, your army finds itself increasingly confined. Spartacus calls an emergency council. We must break through Crassus's lines before they're completed, he says, pointing to the half-finished Roman fortifications on a map. Once they seal the peninsula, we'll be trapped. The plan is straightforward but dangerous. Concentrate your forces for a single, powerful assault on the weakest section of Crassus's line, punch through, and escape the closing trap. It's a direct approach that abandons the hit-and-run tactics that have served you well, but necessity leaves few alternatives. The night before the planned breakout, a tense atmosphere permeates the rebel camp. Everyone understands what's at stake. If the assault fails, the rebellion might be contained and gradually crushed within the peninsula. You spend the evening checking weapons one last time, ensuring your fighters are prepared for tomorrow's battle. Among your group, you notice a mix of determination and fear. These men and women have tasted freedom and fought bravely, but they know tomorrow brings their greatest test yet. A young woman named Eleni, who joined your group after being freed from a wealthy Roman's household, approaches you with concern in her eyes. The Romans say that captured rebels will be crucified, she says quietly. Is it true? You consider lying to reassure her, but decide honesty is what she deserves. Yes, that's likely. Crassus needs to make an example to discourage other slaves from joining rebellions. She nods, absorbing this grim reality. Then we cannot be captured, she says with simple finality. No, you agree. We fight for freedom, or we die trying. There's no middle path now. Dawn breaks cold and clear on the day of the assault. Your combined rebel forces, nearly 40,000 strong, have moved into position overnight, concealed in woods near the Roman fortifications. Across open ground, you can see Roman soldiers working on the walls, unaware of the impending attack. Spartacus himself walks among the assembled rebels, offering final words of encouragement. When he reaches your section, he clasps your arm in a warrior's grip. Your group takes the right flank, he says. Hit them hard and keep moving. Don't get bogged down in prolonged fighting. The goal is to break through, not to defeat every Roman we see. You nod, understanding the strategy. This isn't about winning a battle, but escaping a trap. The attack begins with a coordinated rush from the tree line. Thousands of rebels charge across open ground toward the surprised Romans. Construction workers drop tools and flee, while soldiers scramble to form defensive positions. Your group hits the Roman right flank as planned, overwhelming the hastily formed resistance through sheer numbers and momentum. For a brief, hope-filled moment, it seems the breakout will succeed easily. Then Roman reserves arrive, fresh troops held back in anticipation of just such an attack. The fighting intensifies as trained legionaries engage your rebels in disciplined formation. The initial advantage of surprise fades, replaced by a brutal test of will and strength. You find yourself in the thick of combat, directing your fighters while defending against Roman counterattacks. A centurion recognizes you as a group leader and targets you specifically, his superior weapons and armor nearly overwhelming your defenses. Only the timely intervention of two of your fighters saves you, though one falls to the centurion's blade in the process. Around you, the battle hangs in the balance. Some rebel groups have broken through, while others are pinned down by fierce Roman resistance. The cohesion of your attack begins to fracture as different sections face varying levels of success or failure. Through the chaos, you spot Spartacus leading a charge against a particularly strong section of the Roman line. His fearless example inspires those around him, and they push forward despite heavy losses. Gradually, a gap opens in the Roman defenses. There, you shout to your remaining fighters, pointing toward the breach, "Follow me." Your group fights toward the opening, joining a stream of rebels pouring through the Roman lines. Behind you, others continue to battle, sacrificing themselves to keep the escape route open for their comrades. The breakout ultimately succeeds, though at terrible cost. Perhaps a third of the rebel force is lost, killed, captured, or separated in the confusion. But the majority escapes Crassus's trap, emerging north of his fortifications with the ability to maneuver once more. That night, as the escaped rebels regroup and tend to their wounded, the mood is somber despite the tactical success. Too many friends and comrades were lost, and everyone understands that Crassus will not give up the pursuit. Spartacus calls the remaining leaders together. His face shows the strain of the day's fighting and the responsibility he carries. "We've escaped the immediate trap," he says without preamble, "but our position in southern Italy has become untenable. We must decide now, north or south." The debate that follows is passionate but respectful. Those favoring a northern route argue for crossing the Alps to freedom beyond Roman territory. Those supporting a southern strategy advocate for reaching Sicily, where mountains and the island nature could provide defensible positions. "The Alps passage will soon be clear of winter snow," argues Brennus the Gaul. "Many of us could return to our homelands. The rebellion would have succeeded for those who escape." "But what of those who cannot return home?" counters Castus. "Those from Thrace, Syria, or Africa. The journey's too far, and Roman allies control those lands anyway. Sicily offers the possibility of a new home for all." The discussion continues until Spartacus finally raises his hand for silence. "Both paths have merit," he acknowledges, "but we must choose one. We cannot remain divided against Crassus's united force." He studies the crude map before him, weighing options with the strategic mind that has kept the rebellion alive this long. "North," he decides finally. "We break out of Italy entirely. Those who wish to return to their homelands may do so. Others can remain together and establish a new community beyond Roman reach." Not everyone agrees with this decision, but most accept it as necessary. Unity has been your strength against Rome's superior numbers and equipment. Division now would doom you all. Plans are made to begin the northern march immediately. Every day of delay allows Crassus to strengthen his position and possibly cut off escape routes. Despite exhaustion from the recent battle, the rebel army prepares to move. As you organize your reduced group for the journey, you notice increasing tensions between different factions. The losses during the breakout have frayed nerves, and the decision to move north has disappointed those who favored other options. What was once a unified rebellion shows signs of fragmenting under pressure. Diona, the Greek kitchen slave who has become one of your trusted fighters, expresses these concerns as you pack supplies. "People are talking of splitting up," she says quietly. "Some of the Gauls want to move faster, break away from the main group to reach the Alps sooner. Others think Spartacus is making a mistake and still want to try for Sicily. This news troubles you." "Division would weaken us all," you reply. "Crassus would pick off smaller groups one by one." "I know," she agrees, "but fear and hope make people make desperate choices, and not everyone has the same hope anymore." You report these whispers to Spartacus that evening. He listens with a grave expression but doesn't seem surprised. "I've heard similar concerns," he admits. "The rebellion is at its most vulnerable point. We've tasted enough success to have hope, but faced enough setbacks to know fear. It's a dangerous combination." "What can we do?" you ask. He considers this question carefully before answering. Remind them of what binds us together, not just our past as slaves, but our shared vision of freedom. The moment we separate, we become easier targets for Rome. Only together do we have a chance. You take this message back to your group, and other leaders do the same with theirs. For a time, it seems to strengthen resolve and maintain unity. The Northern March begins with the entire rebel force moving as one. Crassus, however, proves relentless in his pursuit. His legions move with surprising speed for such a large force, always pressing at your rear, forcing you to maintain pace without adequate rest. Smaller Roman units harass your flanks, picking off stragglers and testing your defenses. The constant pressure takes its toll. Food supplies dwindle as you have less time to forage or raid. Weapons break and cannot always be properly repaired. Exhaustion leads to mistakes and accidents. Children and elderly rebels, who had been part of your community since the beginning, struggle with the demanding pace. About 2 weeks into the march north, the tensions that had been simmering finally boil over. A large contingent of Gauls and Germans, perhaps 10,000 strong, announces their intention to separate from the main force and make their own way to the Alps. Their leader, a German former gladiator named Castus, explains their reasoning to Spartacus. "We can move faster without the wounded and children," he says bluntly. "The Alps are our homeland. We know the paths, the passes. Together with your people, we're a larger target for Crassus. Separate, at least some of us might slip through." Spartacus argues against this division, emphasizing the strength in unity that has brought the rebellion this far, but the northern rebels have made their decision. That night, they depart the main camp, taking their fighters and supplies with them. Their separation proves disastrous. Within days, scouts bring news that Crassus divided his forces, sending his lieutenant Gnaeus Pompeius Rufus to intercept the breakaway group. Caught on open ground and without the full strength of the combined rebel army, the Gauls and Germans were surrounded and annihilated. Few, if any, escaped. This news sends a wave of grief and fear through your remaining forces. Not only have you lost valuable fighters and friends, but the defeat demonstrates what happens to rebels who face Roman legions without adequate strength. Spartacus gathers everyone for a somber address. "We mourn our fallen comrades," he begins, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "They fought bravely for freedom, as we all have. Their choice to separate was their right. We are not Romans to command others against their